What would you do if your government told you that praying to God was illegal? What if the penalty for breaking this law wasn't just a fine or jail time, but a death sentence in the most brutal way imaginable? The heavy stone rolled away from the mouth of the den, and King Darius peered down into the darkness below. His heart pounded as he called out with a voice trembling between hope and desperation, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" The silence that followed felt like an eternity. In that moment, the most powerful man in the Persian Empire held his breath, waiting for an answer that would either confirm his greatest fear or witness the most incredible miracle he had ever seen. But let me take you back to the beginning of this extraordinary story, a story that would forever change how we understand faith, courage, and the power of unwavering devotion to God. Before we dive deeper into this incredible journey, I'd love to know where you're listening from today. Drop a comment and let me know your city or state. And if this story is already capturing your attention, would you help us spread these powerful biblical truths by hitting that like button? It really helps more people discover these life-changing stories. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. We're building a community of believers who love diving deep into God's Word together. Now, let's continue with this amazing tale of faith that will leave you absolutely stunned. The rise of an extraordinary man. Daniel was no ordinary man. Born into nobility in the kingdom of Judah, his life took a dramatic turn when he was just a teenager. Picture this. You're living a comfortable life, surrounded by family and friends, worshiping God freely in the temple, when suddenly foreign invaders storm your city. Everything you've ever known is about to be stripped away. This was Daniel's reality around 605 BC when King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon conquered Jerusalem. The Babylonian king didn't just want to defeat Judah. He wanted to completely transform the most promising young men from the Hebrew nobility. His strategy was brilliant and brutal. Take the brightest minds, the strongest bodies, and the most influential family sons, and remake them into Babylonian servants. Daniel, along with his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, whom the Babylonians renamed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, found themselves torn from everything familiar and thrust into a foreign culture that worshipped foreign gods. They were enrolled in a 3-year program designed to erase their Hebrew identity and replace it with Babylonian loyalty. But here's where Daniel's character began to shine. While many might have compromised their faith to survive, Daniel made a decision that would define his entire life. He would serve his captors excellently, but he would never compromise his devotion to the one true God. The first test came immediately. The king's food and wine were offered to idols before being served. For Daniel, eating this food would be participating in idol worship, something his conscience simply wouldn't allow. With wisdom beyond his years, Daniel respectfully requested an alternative diet. When the palace official worried about Daniel's health affecting his own safety, Daniel proposed a 10-day test. He and his friends would eat only vegetables and drink only water, while other trainees continued with the royal food. The results were undeniable. After 10 days, Daniel and his friends looked healthier and stronger than those who had eaten the king's food. God was already showing his favor toward these young men who chose faithfulness over convenience. Excellence in exile years passed, and Daniel's reputation grew. He wasn't just surviving in Babylon. He was thriving. God gifted him with extraordinary wisdom and the unique ability to interpret dreams and visions. When King Nebuchadnezzar had a troubling dream that none of his wise men could interpret, Daniel stepped forward with both the dream's content and its meaning, revealing that God gives wisdom to those who seek him. This moment catapulted Daniel into the highest levels of government. He became one of the most trusted advisors in the Babylonian court. And later, when the Persian Empire conquered Babylon, his reputation for integrity and wisdom earned him a place of honor under the new regime as well. But Daniel's success wasn't just about his natural abilities. What set him apart was his unwavering commitment to prayer and his relationship with God. No matter how busy his governmental duties became, no matter how many state dinners he attended or royal decrees he helped draft, Daniel maintained a disciplined prayer life that would put most of us to shame. 3 times every day, Daniel would go to his upper room, open the windows facing Jerusalem, kneel down, and pray to the God of Israel. This wasn't a casual, 5-minute devotional. These were times of deep communion, intercession, and worship. Daniel understood something that many believers today miss: consistent. Passionate prayer is the secret to spiritual strength and divine guidance for decades. This practice continued uninterrupted through different kings, different administrations, and different challenges. Daniel's prayer life remained constant. Palace servants, fellow officials, and even foreign dignitaries knew about Daniel's dedication to prayer. It wasn't hidden or secretive. It was as regular and visible as the sunrise. The jealous conspiracy. The time our story reaches its climax, Daniel was in his 80s. Most people that age would have been enjoying retirement, but Daniel's wisdom and integrity made him indispensable. King Darius the Mede had recently taken control of Babylon and organized his vast empire into 120 provinces, each governed by a satrap. Over these officials, he appointed 3 administrators to ensure everything ran smoothly. Daniel was one of these 3 administrators, and here's what made the other officials nervous. Daniel was about to be promoted above them all. King Darius was so impressed with Daniel's exceptional qualities that he was planning to give him authority over the entire kingdom. This Hebrew exile, this foreign captive, was about to become the second most powerful man in the Persian Empire. The other administrators and satraps couldn't stand it. Their jealousy burned like acid in their stomachs. How could this foreigner, this worshiper of a foreign god, rise above them? They had to find a way to bring him down. So they did what jealous people have always done. They went looking for dirt. They investigated Daniel's finances, hoping to find corruption. They examined his governmental decisions, searching for evidence of favoritism or abuse of power. They scrutinized his personal life, looking for any scandal they could exploit. But here's what frustrated them beyond measure. They found nothing. Absolutely nothing. Daniel's life was so clean, so transparent, so full of integrity that there wasn't even a hint of impropriety. The Bible tells us they could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy, and neither corrupt nor negligent. Think about that for a moment. These men had unlimited access to governmental records. They could investigate every transaction, every decision, every conversation Daniel had ever had in his official capacity. In today's world, it would be like having the FBI, IRS, and every investigative journalist in America scrutinizing your entire life with a magnifying glass. And they found nothing wrong. This level of integrity didn't happen by accident. It was the fruit of a life lived in constant awareness of God's presence. When you truly believe that God sees everything, when you live with the knowledge that you'll one day give an account for every word and deed, it transforms how you conduct yourself in both public and private. The conspirators finally had to admit defeat, at least in finding legitimate charges against Daniel. But their jealousy wouldn't let them give up. If they couldn't find fault with Daniel the man, they would have to create a situation where Daniel's greatest strength became his downfall. One of them, we can imagine him with a cunning smile, made an observation that chilled the others with its brilliant evil. We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God. They had found their weapon. The trap is set. What happened next was a masterclass in political manipulation. These officials approached King Darius with what appeared to be a show of unity and loyalty. They claimed that all the administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors had agreed on a proposal for a new royal edict. This was their first lie. Daniel, the most important of all these officials, had not been consulted. But Darius didn't know that their proposal seemed reasonable, even flattering to the king. They suggested that for 30 days, anyone who prayed to any god or human being except King Darius should be thrown into the lion's den. They presented it as a way to unify the kingdom and strengthen the king's authority. During the transition period, the idea appealed to Darius's ego. What king wouldn't want to be treated as a god for a month? It seemed like a harmless way to demonstrate the empire's loyalty to their new ruler. The officials knew exactly which buttons to push, and they pushed them expertly. But there was another element that made their trap foolproof. They insisted that the decree be written according to the laws of the Medes and Persians, which could not be repealed. Once the king signed it, not even the king himself could change it. This wasn't just a royal whim that could be reversed later. This would become an unalterable law of the empire. King Darius signed the decree, and the officials could barely contain their satisfaction. They had created the perfect trap. Daniel's commitment to prayer, the very thing that made him such a godly and effective leader, was now illegal, and the penalty wasn't negotiable. Anyone caught praying to any god, except the king, would be executed by being thrown to hungry lions. In their minds, Daniel faced an impossible choice. He could abandon his prayer life and keep his position and his life, or he could continue praying and face certain death. Either way, they won. If Daniel stopped praying, his spiritual life would be compromised, and eventually his effectiveness would diminish. If he continued praying, he would be executed, and they would be rid of him permanently. What they failed to understand was the depth of Daniel's relationship with God. For men who saw religion as a political tool or social convention, Daniel's faith was incomprehensible. They couldn't imagine anyone choosing death over temporarily adjusting their religious practices. The moment of truth news of the royal decree spread quickly throughout the capital city of Babylon. Government officials, merchants, craftsmen, and slaves all heard the same message. For the next 30 days, prayer to anyone other than King Darius was punishable by death. Imagine the conversations that must have taken place in homes throughout the empire that day. Families gathering around dinner tables, discussing this strange new law. Some probably saw it as no big deal. They didn't pray regularly anyway. Others might have decided to pray silently or wait until the 30 days passed. Still others may have chosen to pray to Darius just to be safe. But Daniel faced a different calculation entirely. This wasn't about convenience or even safety. This was about the very core of who he was and what he believed. When Daniel learned about the royal decree, he went home to his upstairs room with its windows open toward Jerusalem, and he got down on his knees and prayed. The Bible doesn't record any great internal struggle or lengthy deliberation. It simply says he did what he had been doing 3 times a day for decades. He prayed and gave thanks to his God. This moment reveals something profound about spiritual maturity. When crisis comes, you don't suddenly become someone different. You become more intensely who you already are. Daniel didn't become a prayer warrior in that moment. He had been one for over 60 years. He didn't discover courage when faced with the lion's den. He had been practicing courage in smaller moments throughout his lifetime. Think about the calculation Daniel could have made. He might have reasoned, I can serve God better alive than dead. If I die now, who will represent godly values in this government? Surely God would understand if I prayed privately for just 30 days. Some might even argue that such reasoning would have been wise and practical. But Daniel understood something that many of us miss in our comfort-driven culture. Some things are more important than life itself. The integrity of his relationship with God, the consistency of his witness, and the honor of God's name were worth more to him than his safety. There's another detail worth noting. Daniel didn't change his prayer location or try to pray secretly. He went to the same upper room, opened the same windows toward Jerusalem, and prayed at the same times he always had. This wasn't defiance for the sake of being rebellious. This was faithfulness for the sake of being faithful. The Watchers Wait officials who had orchestrated this trap knew exactly where to look and when to look. They had probably been observing Daniel's prayer routine for weeks or months, gathering intelligence for their scheme. Now they positioned themselves where they could witness his crime and have multiple witnesses to present to the king. Sure enough, at the appointed time, Daniel knelt in his upper room and began to pray. These men watched through the windows, listening to his voice rising in petition and thanksgiving to the God of Israel. For them, this moment was a victory. Their plan had worked perfectly, but what they witnessed should have given them pause. Here was an 80-year-old man, facing certain death, praying with the same devotion and peace he had shown for decades. There was no panic in his voice, no bargaining with God for a way out, no desperate pleading for the situation to change. Daniel prayed as a man who trusted God completely, regardless of the outcome. The conspirators hurried to King Darius with their evidence. They approached him with feigned concern and patriotic duty. Your Majesty, they said, remember the royal decree you signed. Well, we regret to inform you that Daniel, one of your most trusted advisors, has blatantly disobeyed it. We saw him praying to his God 3 times today, just as he always has. The moment the words left their mouths, King Darius realized he had been manipulated. The Bible tells us he was greatly distressed and made every effort to rescue Daniel. He spent the entire day trying to find a legal loophole, some way to save his faithful administrator without breaking the law he had foolishly signed. But the officials pressed him relentlessly. Remember, Your Majesty, that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed. They had crafted their trap too well. Even the king was caught in its snare. As the sun began to set, Darius faced a terrible choice: break his own law and appear weak before his subjects, or execute the most righteous man in his kingdom. The law won, but it cost the king his peace and possibly his sleep for years to come. Into the den the royal guards came for Daniel as the day was ending. There's no record of resistance or protest. Daniel submitted to rest with the same quiet dignity he had shown throughout his life. As they led him through the streets of Babylon toward the lion's den, word spread quickly. This wasn't just any execution. This was Daniel, the man whose integrity was legendary, whose wisdom had guided kings, whose life had been above reproach for over 60 years. The lion's den was likely a pit carved out of rock, with a large stone that could be rolled across the opening. Archaeological evidence from similar sites suggests these dens were deep enough that escape would be impossible, but shallow enough that spectators could observe what happened inside. The Persians used lions as executioners because it was both terrifying and efficient. Hungry lions would kill quickly, and the spectacle would deter others from breaking royal decrees. King Darius accompanied Daniel to the den. In one of the most remarkable exchanges in biblical history, this pagan king offered a prayer of hope to the Hebrew God. May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you. These words reveal how deeply Daniel's faithful life had impacted even those who didn't share his faith. As they lowered Daniel into the den, several things happened that demonstrate how seriously the Persian legal system took this matter. The king sealed the mouth of the den with his own signet ring, and with the signet rings of his nobles. This meant that no one, not even the king himself, could secretly remove Daniel from the den without breaking multiple official seals. The sentence was final and witnessed, but consider Daniel's perspective in those moments. As they lowered him into the darkness, as he heard the stone rolling into place above him, as the seals were applied and the voices faded away, Daniel found himself alone with the lions and with his God. The Bible doesn't record Daniel's prayers from inside the den, but we can imagine them. This was a man who had prayed 3 times a day for over 6 decades. He wasn't going to stop now. As the lions circled him in the darkness, Daniel likely continued the conversation with God that had sustained him throughout his life. A night of wonders what happened in that den during the dark hours that followed has captured imaginations for thousands of years. The Bible simply states that God sent his angel and shut the mouths of the lions. But let's pause to consider the miracle from different angles. From the lion's perspective, these were hungry predators, probably kept deliberately unfed to make them more ferocious for executions. Their natural instincts should have driven them to attack immediately. Instead, they became docile as lambs. The same God who created them also controlled them. From Daniel's perspective, this had to be one of the longest nights of his life, surrounded by lions that could kill him in seconds, sustained only by his faith in God's protection. Yet the Bible suggests he slept peacefully. When morning came and the king called down to him, Daniel's voice was strong and clear, not weak or terrified. From the angel's perspective, this was just another assignment from the Almighty. The same divine power that had protected Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace now protected their friend Daniel in the lion's den. God's ability to protect his faithful servants hadn't diminished with time, but perhaps most importantly, from God's perspective, this was an opportunity to demonstrate his power and faithfulness before the greatest empire on earth. The Persian Empire stretched from India to Ethiopia, encompassing millions of people and dozens of cultures. What happened in that lion's den would soon be proclaimed throughout that vast territory. Meanwhile, King Darius spent what the Bible calls a sleepless night. He refused entertainment, couldn't eat, and probably paced the floors of his palace until dawn. This pagan king was more concerned about Daniel's welfare than many believers today are about their fellow Christians facing persecution. As soon as daybreak came, Darius hurried to the lion's den. His heart was probably pounding as the guards broke the seals and rolled away the stone. The king's voice echoed down into the pit. Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions? The response that came back must have sent chills of amazement through everyone present. May the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight. Nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty. The tables turned. King Darius was overjoyed. He immediately ordered Daniel to be lifted out of the den, and when they examined him, they found not a single wound. The Bible emphasizes this point. No wound was found on him because he had trusted in his God. But the story doesn't end with Daniel's rescue. Justice demanded that the real criminals be punished. The king ordered that the men who had falsely accused Daniel be brought and thrown into the lion's den, along with their wives and children. This might seem harsh by modern standards, but it reflected the ancient principle that false accusers should face the punishment they had tried to inflict on others. The contrast was stark and immediate. While the lions had been supernaturally restrained from harming Daniel, they showed no such restraint with his accusers. The Bible records that the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones before they even reached the bottom of the den. This detail is significant because it proves several things. The lions were indeed hungry and dangerous. Daniel's protection was genuinely miraculous, and God's justice is perfect. Those who had schemed to destroy an innocent man faced the very fate they had planned for him. The decree that shook an emperor king. Darius was so moved by what he had witnessed that he issued a new decree, one that would reach every corner of his vast empire. Unlike the previous law that had been crafted by jealous officials, this one came directly from the king's heart and personal experience. The decree read, "I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel, for he is the living God and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions." Think about the implications of this royal decree. Throughout the Persian Empire, from modern-day India to Egypt, from the Caspian Sea to the Persian Gulf, government officials read aloud the testimony of what God had done for Daniel. Millions of people heard about the Hebrew God who shut the mouths of lions to protect his faithful servant. This wasn't just a local miracle with limited impact. This was God using one man's faithfulness to proclaim his power and glory throughout the known world. Daniel's refusal to compromise his prayer life for 30 days resulted in the greatest evangelistic campaign in the ancient world. The decree also established something unprecedented: official recognition and protection for the worship of the God of Israel throughout the Persian Empire. While Darius didn't abandon his own gods or force anyone to become Jewish, he acknowledged that Daniel's God was worthy of reverence and fear. The deeper lessons Daniel's story in the lion's den teaches us truths that echo through the centuries and remain powerfully relevant today. Let's explore some of the deeper lessons embedded in this remarkable account. First, the power of consistency in small things. Daniel's faithfulness in prayer wasn't developed in the crisis. It was developed through decades of consistent practice, 3 times a day, every day, for over 60 years. When the test came, he simply did what he had always done. This teaches us that spiritual strength isn't built in moments of crisis. It's built in moments of daily choice. Second, the reality that faithfulness sometimes leads to hardship. Daniel wasn't protected from the lion's den. He was protected in the lion's den. God didn't prevent the crisis. He provided victory through the crisis. Many believers today expect that faithfulness to God will shield them from all difficulties. But Daniel's experience shows us that sometimes God will lead through valleys of danger to demonstrate his power. Third, the far-reaching impact of individual faithfulness. Daniel had no idea that his personal decision to keep praying would result in the gospel being proclaimed throughout the Persian Empire. He wasn't trying to make a statement or start a movement. He was simply being faithful to his relationship with God. Yet God used his faithfulness to reach millions of people with the knowledge of his power and reality. Fourth, the importance of living with integrity. When Daniel's enemies investigated his life, they found nothing wrong. This wasn't because he was perfect, but because he lived transparently and honestly. In our age of social media and instant communication, this lesson is more relevant than ever. Our lives are on display, and our witness for Christ depends on our integrity being genuine and consistent. Fifth, the value of influence rightly used. Daniel could have used his position for personal gain, political power, or comfortable living. Instead, he used his influence to serve God and bless others. Even pagan kings recognized his exceptional character and trusted him with enormous responsibilities. This teaches us that our goal shouldn't be to escape the world's systems, but to serve God faithfully within them. Daniel's legacy. Daniel lived to be an old man, serving faithfully under multiple kings and empires. His prophecies and his example continued to influence God's people for generations. When the Jews were eventually allowed to return to Jerusalem under Cyrus the Great, it was partly because of the favorable impression that faithful Jews like Daniel had made on Persian leadership. But Daniel's greatest legacy wasn't his governmental service or even his prophetic writings. It was his example of unwavering faith in the face of overwhelming pressure. For over 2,000 years, believers facing persecutions have drawn strength from Daniel's example. When prayer is dangerous, when faithfulness costs more than compromise, when standing for God means standing alone, Daniel's story reminds us that God is still able to shut the mouths of lions. During the Roman persecutions, early Christians found hope in Daniel's example. During the Protestant Reformation, reformers like John Huss and William Tyndale drew courage from Daniel's willingness to obey God rather than human authorities. In modern times, believers in communist countries, Islamic nations, and other restricted areas have found strength in Daniel's refusal to compromise his prayer life. Daniel's story also speaks powerfully to believers in free societies who face subtler but real pressures to compromise their faith. When career advancement requires ethical shortcuts, when social acceptance demands silence about biblical truth, when convenience tempts us to neglect prayer and Bible study, Daniel's example calls us to a higher standard. The God who saw us ultimately. This isn't just a story about Daniel, it's a story about God. The same God who shut the mouths of lions for Daniel is the God who sent his Son Jesus Christ to face a much greater enemy than hungry lions. Jesus faced the roaring lion of sin, death, and Satan himself, and he emerged victorious from the grave. Just as Daniel was innocent and didn't deserve death, Jesus was sinless and didn't deserve the cross. Just as God delivered Daniel from the den, God raised Jesus from the tomb. Just as Daniel's deliverance led to a royal decree proclaiming God's power, Jesus' resurrection led to the Great Commission to proclaim the gospel to all nations. The lion's den points forward to the empty tomb. Both demonstrate that no power on earth or hell can ultimately defeat God's purposes or destroy God's faithful servants. Death itself is just another lion whose mouth God can shut. For American believers today, Daniel's story carries special relevance. We live in a nation founded on religious freedom, but we also live in an increasingly secular culture that often views faithful Christianity as outdated, intolerant, or irrelevant. While we may not face literal lions' dens, we do face pressure to compromise our convictions, privatize our faith, and conform to cultural expectations that conflict with biblical truth. Daniel's example encourages us to live with the same consistent faithfulness that marked his life, whether in corporate boardrooms or public schools, in neighborhoods or online spaces, in voting booths or family gatherings. We're called to maintain our integrity and our witness regardless of the cost. The story also challenges us to examine our own prayer lives. How many of us pray with the consistency and passion that Daniel showed? How many of us would continue praying if it became illegal? Daniel's 3 times daily prayer practice wasn't legalistic routine. It was life-giving relationship. It was the source of his wisdom, his strength, and his unshakable peace. The ultimate victorious, we conclude this remarkable story. We're left with questions that demand personal responses. If you were in Daniel's position, would you have the courage to keep praying when it became illegal? Do you have that kind of relationship with God now? Are you living with the integrity that would withstand investigation by your enemies? But perhaps most importantly, do you know the God who shut the mouths of lions? Do you have a personal relationship with the one who demonstrated his power so dramatically? In that ancient den, the same God who protected Daniel in the lion's den sent his Son Jesus Christ to face an even greater danger, the spiritual lions of sin and death that threaten every human soul. Jesus entered the ultimate den when he went to the cross, bearing the punishment for our sins. But just as God didn't leave Daniel in the den, God didn't leave Jesus in the tomb. 3 days after his crucifixion, Jesus rose from the dead, proving that he has power over every lion that could ever threaten us: sin, death, fear, despair, and eternal separation from God. When we put our faith in Jesus Christ, we receive the same divine protection that surrounded Daniel, not just for this life, but for eternity. This is why Daniel could pray with such confidence and peace. This is why he could face the lions without fear. He knew that his life was in the hands of a God whose love and power know no limits. He understood that even if the lions had killed him, death would not have the final word. The God of Daniel is still on his throne today. He still hears the prayers of his faithful servants. He still protects those who trust in him. He still turns the schemes of the wicked into opportunities to display his glory. And he still invites everyone, from Persian kings to American citizens in the 21st century, to fear and reverence his name. When King Darius proclaimed that people should fear and reverence the God of Daniel, He was recognizing something that every person must ultimately decide. Will you serve the God who created you, or will you face him as your judge? The lion's den is empty now, but its message echoes through the centuries. The Lord is faithful to those who are faithful to him. He may not always deliver us from our trials, but he will always deliver us through them. And in the end, when all earthly kingdoms have crumbled and all earthly powers have faded, those who trusted in the God of Daniel will find themselves safe in his eternal kingdom, where no lions roar and no stones can seal us away from his love. Daniel's story began with a teenage boy taken captive to a foreign land. It climaxes with an elderly man thrown to hungry lions, but it ends with a God whose power and faithfulness shine brighter than the darkness of any den. That same story of faithful service leading to divine vindication continues today in the lives of everyone who chooses to trust and serve the living God. The question isn't whether God is able to shut the mouths of lions. Daniel's story settled that forever. The question is whether you and I will have the kind of relationship with God that makes such miraculous intervention possible. Will we pray with Daniel's consistency? Will we live with Daniel's integrity? Will we trust with Daniel's confidence? Because when we do, we discover what Daniel knew, that no lion, whether literal or metaphorical, can ultimately harm those who belong to the God who rules over all. So there you have it, the incredible true story of Daniel in the lion's den, a story that continues to inspire faith and courage thousands of years later. What did you think of this journey through one of the Bible's most dramatic episodes? Did it speak to your heart the way it has spoken to millions of believers throughout history? If this story moved you, encouraged you, or challenged you, would you take just a moment to hit that like button? It really does help us reach more people with these powerful biblical truths. And if you're not already subscribed, please join our community of believers who love diving deep into God's Word together. Thank you for taking this journey with me through Daniel's remarkable story. Until our next story together, may you live with Daniel's faithfulness, pray with Daniel's consistency, and trust with Daniel's unshakable confidence in our great and mighty God. Until the next story,